folks to join. We don't have a whole lot on the agenda formally, but Stephen and I were thinking we could use the time a little bit to brainstorm and chat about release engineering, depending on who all is here and feels like chatting.
Hey, so do you want to give it maybe a minute or two more, see if a few more people pop on?
Yeah.
And I'm going to add some carryover from the SIG PM meeting earlier today. Claire and Lockie and Kendrick were part of that conversation. So. Also, am I like whispering? Am I speaking too low?
Your voice is soft, but it's loud and clear.
Okay.
You're not yelling.
What do you mean?
God.
All right, we've got KubeCon V2 coming up.
So it's 4 past. Let's go ahead and get the party started. This is SIG Release bi-weekly meeting for April 23rd, 2019. This is a recorded community meeting. We will publish the video to YouTube for the historical record for all to see. Please abide by the community code of conduct. We have our standing agenda document. I'll drop it in the Zoom link for reference. There's a couple things on there. So first, I do want to double check, Claire, did we cover everything from the retrospective for 114 that needed covered? I think last time we felt like we had, but I just want to double check because it had carried over.
Yeah, I'm not sure if everyone got to everything, but it's very likely, and I just missed the follow-on call where it was. I guess maybe I was just noticing there were 0 action items out of that retro, and that seems interesting to me. But maybe as a group, there were no actions to be taken for 115.
I feel like there were a few specific things that definitely translated into issues, and there were some things that people did in terms of small changes to role handbooks and docs, and things that did feed into the plan is in terms of the schedule. So I know we took some specific things away that we were aiming to do, but yeah, there weren't dramatic changes being proposed. So anybody else on the call feel like we might have missed something there that was particularly actionable to try to move forward in the next cycle? Okay, well, if you're comfortable, Claire, I feel like we did have a good conversation in terms of what we felt happened well and things that for smaller incremental changes to do. So
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll take a I'll take a read through this document again and just make sure that we actually have all of that stuff captured as action items within the SIG release repo. But I think that I think that the release team, the 114 release team, at least as a team, made sure that a lot of that stuff was documented already. So this will just be a gut check.
Next thing on the agenda then is also you, Claire, and I guess this is what you're talking about, Stephen, carryover from the earlier meeting?
Yes, or at least part of carryover from SIG PM. Yeah, we'd been talking in SIG PM earlier about some of the out of tree questions that were raised a couple of release team meetings ago. I had a specific question around tracking ecosystem projects that have some type of dependency with the release cycle. So there's an item in the release lead handbook around making sure to sync up with those different project leads. It specifically calls out kubeadm, but it mentions that there might be others. And I reached out to Aaron, who didn't have any full list of who all those other ecosystem projects were. So yeah, I raised it in SIG PM, and it sounds like it is something that is more of a release team related coordination that might indeed fall on the release lead to coordinate with these different groups. But yeah, raising it here for further discussion.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so what I mentioned for SIG PM was that if we are going to essentially task the release lead or the release team with something to track kind of like ecosystem dependencies, then we should be sure to enumerate them. If we feel like we can't enumerate them, then we don't need to track them, or we shouldn't track them. kubeadm is one of those things, but I think kubeadm is like for like the location of the code is still Kubernetes, right? So we still handle things that are Kubernetes, so that counts. And having a tight feedback loop with the SIG cluster lifecycle is important towards the end of the cycle. Anything else? I mean, I can see potentially the in-tree cloud providers currently as another target. But I think that SIG Cloud Provider I think SIG Cluster Lifecycle and SIG Cloud Provider are exemplars of how to one, make sure your things are in on time and have a decent feedback loop with SIG Release. So I don't think that there are problems. If there are other ones that we need to be concerned about, like when we say ecosystem, like what is the vastness of the ecosystem that we're referring to, right? And that was a question for all of you.
I know the one specific thing with kubeadm, at the point that they commit code that prefers the new release, and I don't know, Lubomir, I guess you could tell us if this is still the case. Do you commit code that prefers the new RPMs, but then tests start failing until the new RPMs are actually built and published, or was that something that's been changed now?
You mean basically, do we test RPMs in end-to-end tests?
I was under the impression that, like, for upgrade tests, your pre-release kubeadm would be trying to upgrade to whatever pre-release code was somewhere. And at the point that the release was actually going to be cut, since it includes kubeadm needed to be told to prefer, say, in this case, 1.15.0. But since that doesn't exist yet, the tests that were using that code path would fail. But I don't have a clear recollection of what this is, and I thought that it had maybe changed to be more dynamic. So the staging of things and having things fail until the code was cut, that had maybe gone away in the fall.
I see what you mean. This was about a non-existent endpoint. Basically, the releases create a label, like for instance, table-114. We had a problem with kubeadm that this, we were basically bound to pull the latest existing stable. And we had a period of time where the latest existing stable label does not exist yet. So nowadays this is fixed. So this is not a problem. But this is not related to packages.
There is definitely a set of other problems around packages. Another area that I've seen in the past is there's various container images that potentially get updated around the time of release, and there's a desire to have them in sync. So like, oh, what are some of the ones? C Advisor. Which was that, Tim's?
HCD.
etcd potentially. So that happened, I think, in 114, that we didn't have an explicit checkpoint, and lacking that, the release went out, and then somebody on that SIG or subproject area noticed, oh, we forgot to rev the foo, and now we do it in 114.1. And there's a set of little things like this where there's this ecosystem concept is meant to be in sync, but we don't have solid documentation on what the intent is, and then definitely don't have a clear set of steps to ensure that they are pre-synchronized ahead of the release. And the role handbook then kind of reflects that. It's like, make sure you talk to people. This also maybe dovetails into defining the set of dependencies, which we often scramble to collect at the last minute, and those not being in a concise, machine readable, single source of truth place, but scattered across the repo or test code, test automation, makes that much more opaque as well.
So this sounds like a scavenger hunt. Who are the right people for this hunt? Do we leave this as an action item for the release team as we move towards the end of the cycle, or do we try to drive that down sooner?
I think in terms of 115, I'm personally more inclined to figure it out sooner rather than later, so there's no surprises, given any slipping in our release date leaks into KubeCon Shanghai. So I don't mind in terms of 115 doing some investigation and then documenting those notes in my role handbook for whoever my successor is. Though I might need some help in getting pointed in the right direction of who to start investigating, who is all the ecosystem that we should care about is.
I thought we had an issue open on this. I'm scrolling around looking and I'm not seeing it. So I'm also gonna pull up the 114 retro because I could swear we opened an issue.
Yeah, this is something that I also mentioned in SIGPM that I don't necessarily want to fall strictly on the release team lead's head. I think that this can probably be cast out to a few different roles in terms of investigation. I'm trying to ponder who those might be.
I know this is an easy way to kind of start a bike shed on it, but I've felt for a while that this is deserving of a KEP. Somebody to articulate the problem space and lay out one or more potential proposal solutions on how we could collect the core dependency set in a centralized, machine readable way.
Yeah, is it a manifest or something that just lives in the repo or some such? Yeah.
I made this proposal like last cycle, but I'm sorry, I really don't have the time to create such a proposal right now. Too busy with other stuff, but if somebody has the time, please go ahead. The idea was to create a machine readable object that outlines the dependencies of the current Kubernetes release, and this should map to a branch. We also discussed that it should be in a folder somewhere in KK with the owner's file that is kind of non-blocking to the community in a way, that people can just PR changes to dependencies. Also, there was a proposal from Caleb to basically use the pulled images from the internet and say that, hey, this is the latest image, so maybe that's the latest dependency that we have. And there was another proposal by Mike from SIG Release, who wrote the release tool, to basically use some sort of a label and another release note type of field in the PR, where people can basically say that, hey, I'm bumping a dependency. But like all the solutions have problems, one way or the other. So yeah, probably a cap is needed, and to propose all the available options and like see what people think about it. I'm sorry, I don't really have the time this cycle. It just too many things ramped up for me.
Yeah,
No, that's fine. I
that's
think
fine and
yeah.
normal. This was, I definitely found it in the 114 retrospective, and we did not open an issue on it. And I'm recalling now us sort of chatting back and forth and thinking that we would start drafting a KEP, but it did fall by the wayside. So let's
Let's at
Stephen,
least log an issue, please.
yeah. Stephen, what do
Yeah.
you think about logging this and assigning it to us versus the release team? Like, I would rather enable the release team versus saddling them with establishing this.
A thing that doesn't have a clear boundary or anything. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So additionally, like with regards to the tracking, not just dependencies but also enhancements. I know Lubomir, you had put something out not recently at this point, maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago. An issue that kind of detailed like enhancement tracking, which was and I had mentioned that it was like very similar to something that we had planned, essentially to drain the queue of enhancements of like currently opened enhancements issues. So the idea there, and there was some tooling that Caleb wrote that is in flux right now, so I don't know how we bring it back into the picture just yet, but hopefully soon we'll have an answer on that. Essentially, the idea being we drain the queue of enhancements issues, right? And for each release, the same way we create a release directory, right, within SIG Release releases 114, release 115, so on and so forth. We do the same for the enhancements repo, right? And the enhancement issues instead become receipts, right? Receipts that are some machine readable, probably YAML, right? That essentially say like, this is the link to the docs, this is the statement of intent, right? The stage that the thing is moving into, right? And those go into a enhancements releases, release 115, 116, right? And go into a proposed folder, right? And then from the proposed folder, some automation takes over. Like the people who are allowed to merge it, which would be like the enhancements lead, the release team lead, the SIG release and SIG PM people, right? The people who have the ability to merge into proposed, right? Some automation takes over and carries proposed into accepted, right? Because it's been approved by the relevant people that would need to approve it. And then from there, you have this readout of, then we can consume that and present that any way we want, pretty contributor site or something like that, right? Then you have this readout of the things that are promised for this right, for this release, as opposed to tracking on a spreadsheet, right? Right, you've already had that statement of intent within the repo, right? And it's committed to memory, it's committed to Git history, and then the same would happen for the exceptions process, right? The exception would essentially be filing one of those receipts again to an exceptions bucket within that repo, right? And then the enhancements lead can go in and say this exception is approved or whatever. Again, the automation carries that from the exception side into the accepted, right? And so that was the general idea of the machine that would be built. I don't know what it's, again, I think, I think that over the last few months, we've all been low bandwidth. So we've been building cases and we've been building cases and writing KEPs and building teams as opposed to doing some of the work. So I think that, now we're getting to a point where A lot of the things that we've been looking to staff, right? SIG PM side, we're staffing. SIG release, we're staffing. We've spun out. We're starting to spin up this release engineering subproject, and over the last few months, the Kate's infra team has spun up too. So like that will come up later because we're going to be talking about packaging and all this good stuff. But I think that we're getting to the point where like we've taken the concepts and we understand like where we need to carry these things forward, and we have some of the people that we know can execute on this stuff. So now we just have to do it, right? So part of that, I mean, we've got a SIG release project board, which I can link. I am intending on grooming all of the issues on that board, and tagging them as for a milestone for 115. So any issue that is not assigned, if you're on the release team, if you're listening to this call and interested in contributing to SIG release in any way, any issue that is not assigned, I'll make sure to tag that as help wanted, and you should feel free to pick it up or chat with us about how you can execute on it. So.
Yeah, I find the receipts idea interesting. I guess the proposal was not made public from SIG PM, correct? You're muted, Steven.
I was saying you were breaking up while you were talking.
I was asking, was this proposed in the public, like the whole idea with receipts, or was it a private channel that created the proposal?
So I'm thinking that I haven't been able to find it, so we must have chatted about it in public. There were some legalities to the tool, which is why it was probably discussed in private. But it's also why I held up on responding to your issue, because I didn't have a good answer just yet. So I'll double back on that stuff. Apologies for that not being in public.
Yeah, no problem. I was interested, like, because I don't understand the whole picture with the implementation details. Like, for instance, if I have a receipt, or rather, if I have a feature that is marked as alpha or marked as beta, but there's a mistake, I have to remove the beta state and change it to alpha. Should I file a PR against the repo, the enhancement repo? I mean, how should that work?
So is the mistake as in it was a typo, as in it should have never been alpha, or it should have never been beta, or is the mistake that you don't have the requisite things to make it beta?
Yeah, for instance, if I don't have the time to complete the full feature graduation.
So there would be another folder called slipped, right, which we would carry things over to as the release was closing up.
So there's a special handling for this, I see.
Yeah, so there's actually a, let me see if I can find it on the fly. Yeah, so Jason and I presented at KubeCon last year. And
I saw your video, maybe link to the others.
Right, so this is let me link the, okay. So if you look at future states within this slide deck, that should give you an idea of what we're driving towards.
It requires permissions.
Oh, that should be open. Hold on.
Can't get it either.
Bummer.
But basically, my main concern with the receipts was that this will create a lot of noise in the repo in terms of PRs. Everybody will have to send a PR for every single change they want to make to a feature. Is that
so
correct?
how frequently are they making changes? If the receipt is requesting, I want to link to your KEP, I want to link to know where your docs are, I want to know what the state of it's going to be by the end of this release. Like if that's only happening through the enhancement cycle, right, which is essentially when we're collecting enhancements anyway, right, and that closes down, right?
so one of the frequent questions by the enhancement team is like, where are your PRs for this feature? Like, should we send updates to the receipts to update the list of PRs? Like,
So where the list of PRs should actually be is in the implementation history of your KEP. That's exactly what that place is for. The KEP is meant to be the steel thread that ties all of these things together, right? I should be able to look at the KEP and have the grand vision of what that enhancement's doing and what the state of it is.
I see. So the PRs should be listed in the KEP, basically.
Yep, in the implementation history.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Cool.
Do you think we need or could build some level of automation that would give a reminder? I think that like these steel threads are easier to say versus keep weaving forward. Like when
Yeah.
somebody's building.
So the tricky part about the reminders are we had talked about doing it first. I talked about doing this like a while ago and weaving this into kind of like feature tracking overall. So I have, oh geez, we're going into the archives now. Hold on. So I have like a hidden KEP that I had wrote, and I didn't want to muddy the waters. So this never, I mean, it's open to the public, but it never, I never pushed on it. But essentially, like, we were concerned with the idea that we were attacking tools as opposed to the people in the process. So I backed up on that and said, like, okay, well, we have to get people to understand this, and we have to develop a process with people in mind first, right?
Yeah, I remember all those conversations around process, and now, I mean, a year-ish later.
Oh, you commented on this too.
Oh yeah, but I think now would be a time to say, like, okay, so like Lubomir said, so I get asked where are my PRs, and oh, like implicit in that conversation, I heard, oh, I was supposed to put that in the KEP. I wasn't supposed to just make the PR. I was supposed to also make a PR against the KEP. So like, how could we, at that point, once we've got the process rolling, how do we nudge the people more friendly towards that last step?
So I think that we can, so a good suggestion that Lockie made, I think a few weeks ago at a SIG PM meeting, was that a one-sheeter would be useful. Right, so we can expand on the FAQ of like how to submit a KEP in general, right? I think that some of that stuff is out of date. And if it said like, hey, here are all the things, like, are you running into a release cycle? Here are all the things you need to know. Are your blahs in this place? Are your things in blah? Have you gotten approval for X? And, you know, and so on and so forth. And just give like, this is the way to not fail at KEPs kind of rundown. I think that would be a good action item to take.
So I'm sorry, I'm going back to the sending updates to the PR list in the KEP, but it's about the history of already merged PRs, right? The implementation history. Should the history also contain PRs that are not yet merged that the release team should track?
So I feel like I would be curious to hear more from the people who are actually doing that work. So people on the release team doing issue and bug triage, understanding like how much they care about that stuff. Like, because if you have declared your intent and you're doing it and it's listed in your KEP, right? That means that we no longer have to track those PRs. Right? If you have committed to, like, if everyone has committed to making sure that stuff is part of their KEP in implementation history, then we can come to the KEP whenever we want. So the review and approval cycle of that is entirely disconnected from the release team, right? If we're saying so like, basically, I want to derive the value of having the release team track all of those PRs, right? If it's something that's, you know, if it's something that's going to mess up tests, like, yes, totally. Like, these are things that we should have our eyes on, right? But like, if it's tagged for the milestone and it's like, I want to know what the impact would be for issue and bug triage before making a call on that, really.
Yeah, also different SIGs operate differently in terms of how much of the sheer volume of code they merge. For
Right.
instance, SIG node, they have gigantic PRs that touch like the whole repository. That's a single PR. And SIG Quest Lifecycle, we have 10 small PRs that implement a single feature.
Within very controlled environments, yeah. It's
So we have to list 10 PRs in the history.
yeah. So I mean, so I think let's ask this question. If I wanted to get details about what an enhancement was doing, how much of the picture would I want to see? Would I want to see the full picture? If that's the case, then yes, you should be keeping it in your implementation history. If you want to craft the picture that you want people to see, again, knowing that this is going to be the steel thread for that enhancement, what do you want that picture to look like? That's a question every SIG should be asking, right?
Yep.
So like I think that we can provide guidance there from a release and a PM perspective, but I think that, you know, this process only evolves with us giving people some, like laying a broad plan and giving people some freedom to find the way their SIG works best within that plan. Like I don't think we can dictate exactly what this is going to look like.
Yeah, I'm basically okay with whatever solution we have, like something that is probably better than what we have at the moment. Only milestone maintainers can update issue at K enhancements. People get out of touch, nobody updates them. Basically, there's discussions like what is the state with the release team. Yeah, the process can be improved. Do you have some sort of a roadmap for the whole refactor? the scary question.
Not yet, but coming soon. I think that, you know, so for those of you who are aware, we've just partially changed our SIG PM leadership. So it's myself, Jace, Caleb, and Ihor now. So now that we have a full team of people who have been doing the work more frequently, and we're kind of getting unburdened by a few things that we can start driving a roadmap. But it will take a little bit.
All right, sounds good.
So it looks like the next one is another carryover from the SIG PM meeting, and it's basically how to handle stale enhancements. So I don't know if Kendrick, are you on the call? Yeah,
I am here. You want me to kind of run with it?
Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah. So this the idea of how this kind of topic got started was doing the 115 enhancement collection. Going through the process, there were, I believe when I started, there were 130 open issues. Going through, figuring out which people or which issues were being on milestones was great. Started to track them. Right now we're sitting around, I think, like 36, 37 tracked issues. That's out of 130, keep that in mind. So you've got this other 100 issues that I've commented on all of them, asking for some sense of what's going on. Is this can be included or not? We've probably had about 20 to 30 responses that says, you know, this is not going to happen in 115. It's going to stay in beta, whatever it's going to be. So then we've got, at this point, another 70 responses that it's just generic. Who knows? I don't know. Like, it's just all up in the air. So this is when I had talked to Steven in SIG PM to try to figure out what do we do in a case that there is implemented code that's in an alpha or beta state that has no plans to ever graduate or to go to GA and stable. And that's where it's all kind of stemmed from.
Yeah, so my response to all of that is, again, like I think that everything that we should do in people and process and building automation for all these things are to minimize the workload for the release team, right? I think that, you know, it's unfair for there to be an expectation to consistently consistently like track people down for answers to code that they own, right? At the end of the day, code ownership belongs to subprojects, and by extension of that belongs to the SIGs. The SIG should feel responsible for keeping these enhancements up to date. If enhancements go stale, that should not be our problem specifically, right? So I was mentioning that like specifically for Kubernetes enhancements, the Fatabot is one on, and two, there's some extra magic there to make sure that something is never marked as lifecycle frozen. The reason for that being lifecycle stale only kicks in after, what is it, 90 days or something like that, which is the scope of a release cycle, right? If someone is unable to update their like an enhancement issue once within the span of a release cycle, it should go stale. It should wither away. That says you're not tracking it, right? And that says we should not track it. So that's my general feel on it. But I don't want to muddy the other opinions, although I already have, right?
I feel like there's maybe one other ask in that though. Like there's supposed to be, like there is documentation, or there used to be. I have to go look. I feel like it's moved around, and I wonder if it's shuffled and gotten tidied somewhere into non-existence, maybe in the community repo. But there used to be a document talking about like SIGs work up ideas, and at the point that they've really demonstrated enough of a proof of concept and intent to take it forward, that it merges and is considered alpha. And then some criteria to go beta after at least one cycle at alpha, and some criteria to go forward. And it actually said like it could take 12 to 18 months for you coming to the project with an awesome idea to get it to a stable V1 feature that everybody can know and trust and use and love. But if things didn't make that beautiful progression all the way to the end, the idea bubbled up enough to merge and sat there at alpha, and we don't have a clear criteria, I don't think, for saying like this should be ejected. And I think I'm hearing Kenny say that like if this is something that's sat there at a really raw state for a really long time, should we actually do housekeeping and push on the SIGs to say, just the same as we say like, hey SIGs, are you working to bring this forward in this cycle? Hey SIGs, should you actually, does this sat here forever, should you go ahead and subtract it from the repo?
So I think not entirely tangential to that. The next thing that came up was we don't have a real concept of, that's great that Dims is here, we don't have a real concept of unified graduation criteria for the project, period. Right. So if anyone who writes a KEP or has the expectation of bringing an enhancement forward, right, they have to imagine what graduation criteria is, because we have not defined it, right? We have deprecation policies, we have a few other things about like how we do API reviews and stuff like that, but we don't have unified graduation criteria for the project. And that is, if we could easily say if we did that this has not met this bar, thus it has to be kicked out, right? And again, like the responsibility should still be on SIGs to handle that ejection process, but there's also a responsibility for SIG architecture to create this criteria. So I think it's a shared responsibility with SIG architecture in the driver's seat and PM release and testing participating, and docs test, all of those participating. So everything that we require within the release sign-off checklist within a KEP, all of those teams should be involved with architecture driving that forward.
You need to let the SIG know by creating an issue. We don't know that this is something you expect us to do.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, like, I'm glad you're on the call, because I realize I have all of the people who need to be on all of the calls at the same time are not there. So I talk about it on the PM calls, and I realize I'm like, there are no architecture people here. So I'd mentioned it in the architecture face-to-face for KubeCon. towards the end, and Jace came up to me later and he's like, the answer is no. I was like, I know, I just wanted people to say that it was no.
Okay, so on that note, we are going to do a triage of the issues marked SIG architecture on Thursday. So if you file it now, before that, it will be awesome.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yay!
I appreciate you bringing this up, Kenny. It's something that had kind of caused me some confusion or consternation last year, looking at this huge set of stuff that was just sitting there, and somehow we pulled some out on fuzzy criteria, and there was definitely a wonder, why is the majority of the stuff just kind of floating out there?
Yeah, like my concern was exactly with that. Like, yeah, the bot might close all these issues and then that's it. But there's nothing that's going to reconcile and take out code with inside a KK that could just be bloat at this point. We have no idea what some sort of alpha implemented feature is just hanging around with inside there, which can
And
also.
I totally, yeah, I totally agree. I think that there is also, I think we're continually in this like state of trying to find balance of like what are the things that we try to attack, and for the most part we try to attack the active things, right? So it's easy to see this falling by the wayside because people would prefer to attack the things that have velocity as opposed to the things that don't, right?
Right. So one thing here is we have been holding the line, at least trying to, that all alpha features should have feature gates. So, and then in one of the Go files, we have marked when things were added.
Right.
So that is one place where we can go look for things that we can nuke.
Okay, that's like features.go or something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's definitely something that we can use to go ping different SIGs saying, do you really want to keep this around, or can we just remove it?
Awesome.
It's an important thing to do, I think, for code hygiene and overall health and performance, because like this sort of thing is why we still have floppy drivers in the BIOS emulated, and long multi-second pauses as machine boots up to check if there's a floppy disk inserted when there's not, because we're in the cloud where it can turn it runs for the sake of a container to start.
So I'm loving this. I think that we have some, and I appreciate everyone who has brought topics forth for discussion. I think that we probably should have left a half an hour or more for the next topic, but we should at least broach it because it's been coming up as a pressing need. So that said, Tim, do you want to take away release engineering needs and planning?
Sure. This is such a broad topic. I struggle at where to even start. So there's a little bit of a doc there that just kind of visually describes what we have and why it's problematic and where we might try to go to improve. And we've talked about setting up a sub-project, but in a lot of ways, the implementation details have felt gated, and it's been hard for newcomers to really get involved in trying to make code changes, because a lot of the existing process, there are steps that are slightly opaque, especially historically. They're things that were only run inside Google by Googlers, and that has broadened out and had more visibility. But then a portion of that was, oh, look at this code. It's maybe not what I would have designed, and that sort of turns people away. But it's there and it works for the people who run it. So you have this weird inertia where people are wanting to help modernize the process, but it's difficult and awkward. Parallel to that, there's the whole work group, Kate's Infra, that is shifting. Now, there's been this formal pledge of support to make the test infrastructure happen under a neutral body via the CNCF. And infrastructure, there's work going on to stand that up. But I think from SIG Release side, I'm hearing more and more people expressing frustration at the pace of this and wanting to see more forward progress on the release tooling and automation. But I struggle kind of jumping in response to that because I feel like we need a solid end-to-end pipeline articulated, what we want the design to be. Again, kind of what Stephen mentioned earlier. Earlier in my career, I was really taught to focus on what is it that people do? What's the desired outcome? What is the use case? And based on that, define the processes that are going to support that, document them, and then work to turn that from a more manual process to an automated process via tooling. So it goes people, process, tooling in that order. Otherwise, you micro-optimize. We start writing the tools, and we've got people jumping in right now who are like, "Oh, these tools are really weird. I want to straighten the tools up." But the tools don't exist in isolation. They're part of this broader develop, build, test, release, support, iterative spectrum of needs. So we've got a lot that could be improved here. We don't have what is by any means an industry best practices build and release pipeline, and those are industry best practices. So there's lots of practitioners out there who can look at it and see what work needs done, but we need to figure out how to clearly articulate that roadmap. First, the vision, the roadmap of where we want to get there, and break it down into a backlog of work that people can actually contribute to. So just kind of with that introduction, I'm curious what people think, and maybe Dims to hear a little bit more what progress has happened just lately on the infra side.
Right. So the main thing that we've been focused on the infra side is the container images stuff. We don't have. It's like the cloud providers or the cluster API providers or the CSI providers. All of them have run their own repositories in Docker or somewhere. Docker Hub or somewhere else, and there is varying levels of who has access to what and things like that. And so that was the first problem that we wanted to tackle, and good progress has been made. We are going to try there is a image import process in place. We're going to kickstart with a limited set of people this week and next week, and then we will hopefully be opening up to more people. So the idea is that each group of people, whether it's a cluster API or the cloud providers or CSI folks, they will have their own GCR repository where a limited number of people, including their the leads, the sub-project leads, and whoever else, but a limited set of people in that area will be given access to their own repository. So they would be able to push, for example, the CSI provider for something, Portworx or whatever, right? They should be able to push image to their own repository, do certain amount of testing, and kick the tires and things like that, right? And then they would be able to promote from that repository to the main repository. And that would go through an approval process where they would have to enter the SHA, whatever, the image ID in a YAML file, and one of us has to approve it. And that's the way we would promote. So we would have a record of where did we get the image from, where did we copy it to, and who requested the change and things like that.
Who is one of us? Is like one of us the Kate's infra team?
The Kate's infra team.
Because
at this point, so right now, that's where it is. And then we kind of define the technical side of this stuff, and then we would give it over to, we'll talk it with SIG Contrabex or whoever wants to take care of this process. We would end up delegating to them. It could be the SIG release team too.
So because what's kind of scary about that is what I'm hearing, at least, is the final gate is 5 people. The final gate for all promotion process becomes 5 people.
No, we could even do owners files, and certain owners within specific subdirectories should be able to do that too.
Okay.
I was talking about the 5 people for the main owners directory. We would definitely have directory structure hierarchy, and we would have the owner's files in each of the things. So that's something that we need to work on.
Okay.
We just want to get the technical side up and running, and then we would do the we would basically try things out and see if things work. For example, things we need to do is include moving. We use Google Groups right now for that initial repository thing. We have to move those kinds of things into like the G Suite that we have, and then there is a G Suite. There's a set of people working on the G Suite stuff, doing APIs for creating Google Groups and updating Google Groups from GitOps perspective. So those kinds of things are going to be there, but at least there'll be people who are not from Google able to push the button. That's where we want it to be. So that's the first thing that we wanted to do, and we made good progress there. Now, the second thing that I'm hoping that we all agree on would be how do we create a repository for the RPMs and depths. So that's where I think we need to find some people who are interested in this problem, so we can prototype a directory structure for the RPMs and the debs, and go from there. And
so we've discussed actually Tim Pepper, Tim Sinclair, and I have discussed that on Monday, and I believe Tim Sinclair was already speaking with Tim Hawken about it. Lots of Tims in this equation, but we have people ready to dedicate to this. So
okay, I need at least 1 or 2 people who are willing to carry the torch, because the image promoter, we made it happen because Linus was there, and Linus was trying to coordinate everything, and he wrote a bunch of the code and things like that.
Yeah.
So we need, there's a lot of us who like work little bits here, little bits there. We needed like at least 1 or 2 dedicated people who want to do this.
Yeah, it's not I mean, it's not sustainable having like the 5 people who are parts of Kate's info team are part of probably like some of the most oversubscribed people in the project.
That's why
it's not fair to have you guys working on it.
Right. So we want to find people who are interested in the problem, and then give them the capability and the authority to execute on it. And we would just oversee
yeah, I was just about to say the recording paused, but
sorry,
I'm back.
I mismoused in the window. I am interested. Hannes Horl is interested. We've both been talking and hashing some things out. There have been a variety of KEPs, because it's the way we're doing this is suboptimal at the moment. But again, it's part of a pipeline. So initially, we ended up talking about how we fix this, and we kind of devolved into, let's have a KEP on how we build packages and a KEP on how we publish packages. So the publishing KEP goes into this, but I think also based on some of the learning we had in the failure with the CNI provider package, that dependency articulation at the end of 114, or well, and it hits everything. It was.
So I think that it's also funny that I believe we had an issue open at some point for someone requesting an understanding of what the Kubernetes CNI package packaging process was, and it might have gone stale like right before the release hit. So I think it's kind of like maybe it's not funny.
So I like to start small. So what I would say is, if we get a space in a GCS bucket and have one of the nightly jobs push RPMs and debs to it, that's where I would like to start.
Okay.
Right?
So
start small and then build on that success.
So because, keep going.
Because there is an opportunity for the image promotion process. The same steps that we have will work for RPMs and debs too. So, but then the first thing we need to do is being able to get somebody outside of Google to be able to push to the initial GCS bucket.
We've got multiple people, so we're ready to do this. I think, you know, from what I said on that call was like between Tim and I, we need to sit down and what we need to do, like outside of the K-Tinfra team, is actually sit down and say, one, we need to consolidate, like maybe not consolidate, but put them in the same location. All of the KEPs that exist for packaging things right now, make sure they're in the same location, and make sure there's maybe an Omni KEP that describes some of this flow and maybe breaks out to those subkeps. But also define what the SIG release vision is, right? So now that we issued a charter, it's maybe 6-7 months since we issued the charter, and Aaron had put down like, here are some things I'd like to clarify. Like, here's some things I'd like clarification on within the charter. And I basically said, I was like, I can't do that now because like we don't even have the teams to do this stuff, right? It's like, it's just an idea right now. But I think that we've gotten to the point where we have some of the people who understand what needs to happen, and we need to in better detail describe what that stuff is. So defining what the SIG release strategy is, because like ultimately I see this as just part of, like, not a team, but just part of release engineering, period, of part of that sub-project.
I get all that, but from a practical point of view, I want to get a nightly job working. And then when we hit a milestone, we should be able to publish the milestone artifacts. And then when we go to the alpha and beta, you know, those should go in there as well. And at any given point in time, we should be able to point either jobs or tools to be able to pick up the artifacts from there. Because honestly, the main problem we have is that the .0 people don't believe in the .0 releases, is because people haven't been able to try those things.
Yep.
So I want to get there, and I want to do it in baby steps. So all the talk about the KEPs is good, but we do want.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, we're going to be attacking. We're
Yeah.
going to be attacking two things at the same time.
Right.
K-Tinfra team is going to be attacking getting these steps in place, but we need to define, as SIG release, we need to define the vision. For what
I agree, but then we need somebody who can bridge the two together, right?
I'm happy to do that. Now, one specific question: the way things are being set up right now relative to the new infra. So, like, some of the things that I've started trying to split apart in the packaging, and I don't have a big background on Debian packaging, but I know RPMs and RPM spec files well. And Hannes is the opposite. He's got the Deb side. So we've sort of been bouncing ideas back and forth off each other, and both going, yeah, I can implement this half of it.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted a playground repo, or
I'll get you a playground repo.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So just like a tools place to put automation stuff.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll get you a GCS repo, which you can use for, but then obviously it will be temporary, and then we have the thing to wipe it off. So you should script whatever you can. So when we need to stand it up again, you are able to stand it up again.
And
because
if that were to draw initially on my github.com tpepper/Kubernetes whatever branch, or like where should I be committing my code that's not yet KK ready, or Kubernetes release, or Kubernetes SIG release, but
Kubernetes SIGs. We can create a repo for this in Kubernetes SIGs. I think
Just
that this is a valid,
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And one of us can approve it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I guess there have been a couple other things like that have gone by, and like Linus's stuff as well, right?
Right. I want to emphasize that I want to start small and then build up on it, because we talk about the big picture and then we end up, treading water.
Not executing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, like, great chat. I think this is super fun. I think we're moving in the right direction. We'll all probably have to jump around between the working group K-Tinfra meetings and the SIG release meetings to really drive this down. But thank you everyone for showing up today and for the lively debate. We will catch you on the flip side.
Have a great day, everyone.